Solomon, the wisest king who ever lived, a man whose reign began with humility, with wealth and wisdom beyond measure, but whose life ended in tragedy, compromise, and divine judgment. This is the story of the last days of King Solomon's life. Solomon's rise. When Solomon first sat on the throne of Israel, he was still young. The great David, his father, had died. The people looked to Solomon, but he himself knew he lacked the strength and wisdom of his father. So one night, in Gibeon, God appeared to him in a dream. The voice of the Lord spoke. "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." What would a king ask for? Power, riches, victory over enemies. But Solomon's reply was different. He said, "I am only a little child, and do not know how to carry out my duties. Give your servant a discerning heart, to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong." And God was pleased, because Solomon did not ask for riches, nor for long life, nor the death of his enemies. The Lord said, "I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings." And so it was. The wisdom of Solomon became famous throughout the world. From every corner of the earth, kings and queens traveled to hear his words. When the Queen of Sheba came, she saw his palace, his officials, the food on his table, the burnt offerings he made at the temple, and she said, "The half was not told me. Your wisdom and prosperity exceed the fame of which I heard." Under his rule, Israel entered its golden age. The magnificent temple of the Lord rose in Jerusalem, shining with gold, its walls filled with cedar, its courts echoing with the sound of worship. The nation was secure. Silver was as common as stones. Peace reigned throughout the land. No king was greater in wisdom, honor, or splendor. The turning point, but even the wisest man is not beyond temptation. Over time, Solomon's heart began to change. He loved many women princesses from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and Egypt. The Bible tells us he had 700 wives of royal birth, and 300 concubines, and these women turned his heart away from the Lord. He began to compromise. To please them, he allowed shrines and high places to be built for their gods: Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians; Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab; and Molech, to whom children were burned in sacrifice. The man who had once built the greatest temple for the Lord was now building altars for idols. The man who had once stood in dedication before God, saying, "The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built," was now bowing to false gods made by human hands. His wisdom was unmatched. Yes, his knowledge was vast. But wisdom cannot protect a man whose heart is divided. Solomon began to forget the very commandments he once taught, and slowly his heart grew cold. God's anger, and the Lord was angry with Solomon. Twice the Lord had appeared to him. Twice he had commanded him to remain faithful, to worship no other gods. But Solomon did not listen. So God declared, "Since you have not kept my covenant, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom from him, but will give him one tribe. For the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen." The judgment was spoken. The glory of Israel would not last beyond Solomon's reign. Enemies rise, and then the enemies began to rise. For years, Solomon's wisdom and power had kept the land in peace. But now rebellions stirred. Hadad, that Edomite, who had fled to Egypt as a boy when David conquered Edom, returned. He hated Israel, and he made trouble from the south. From the north came Rezon, who gathered raiding bands and set himself up as king of Damascus. He struck Israel again and again, and in Solomon's own household, another threat arose. Jeroboam, one of his servants, was given authority over the tribes of Joseph. And the prophet Ahijah came to Jeroboam with a cloak, tore it into 12 pieces, and said, "Take 10 pieces, for this is what the Lord says. I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes." The once unshakable kingdom was beginning to crumble. Solomon's final years, in his later years, Solomon grew weary. The man who had once spoken thousands of proverbs and composed songs of praise grew silent. The women he loved continued to lead him into deeper idolatry. His wealth, once a sign of God's blessing, became chains of excess. The same king who had written, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding," no longer lived by his own wisdom. The one who had written, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge," now feared the loss of power, the threat of enemies, the displeasure of his wives. The man who had begun his reign by saying, "I am but a little child," ended it as a tired king, surrounded by idols, his heart far from God. Solomon's death, after ruling Israel for 40 years, Solomon died. The scriptures record simply, "Then Solomon rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David, his father. His son Rehoboam became king." But it was not long before the kingdom split, exactly as God had said. 10 tribes broke away and followed Jeroboam. Only Judah and Benjamin remained loyal to the house of David. The United Kingdom, once shining in glory, was now divided. The golden age of Israel was over. The lesson of Solomon, the life of Solomon, is both inspiring and tragic. He began with wisdom, humility, and devotion to God. But he ended with pride, disobedience, and sorrow. He had everything: riches, fame, honor, power, women, wisdom. But in the end, he lacked the one thing that mattered most: a faithful heart. The story of Solomon reminds us that wisdom alone is not enough. Knowledge alone cannot save us. If the heart turns away from God, even the wisest man can fall. It is not how we begin the journey that defines us most, but how we finish. Solomon's final words, yet, even in the midst of his decline, Solomon left behind words that still guide us. In the book of Ecclesiastes, written near the end of his life, he confessed the emptiness of all earthly pursuits: wealth, pleasure, success, power, vanity of vanities. He wrote, "All is vanity." And then, with a weary but clear voice, he gave his conclusion. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God, and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. These were the words of a man who had tasted everything the world could offer, and found that without God, it was meaningless. So we remember Solomon, the wisest king, who fell in his later years. May we learn from his life. May we guard our hearts against pride, temptation, and distraction. And may we finish our own race, not just with wisdom, but with faithfulness. For in the end, wisdom without obedience is empty. But faithfulness, even without riches or fame, brings eternal reward.